The black and white checkered floor, the hum of dying neon lights, the stale smell of coffee and grease hanging heavy in the silence, and the most powerful man in Louisiana on his knees. Dominic Corsetti's $8,000 suit was soaked through with rain and sweat, the fabric clinging to shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of 43 death warrants. His dark eyes, the color of storm clouds before lightning, were fixed on the small child lying motionless in the booth behind him. Emma. His Emma. 6 years old. Her small chest barely moving. Thunder rattled the diner windows like a fist demanding entry. Vinny and Gino stood frozen against the counter, their phones in trembling hands, watching their boss, a man they had seen negotiate with federal agents, a man who had ordered the dissolution of rival operations with nothing but a glance, reduced to nothing. Reduced to this. A father. A terrified man whispering a child's name over and over like a prayer that had never worked before and would not work now. Her pulse is dropping, one of the paramedics said, his voice tight with the kind of certainty that meant death was already writing its claim. The hospital is 17 minutes away. In this storm, maybe 20. 17 minutes. Lightning cracked across the sky and for one frozen second the diner flooded with white light, and in that moment Dominic Corsetti looked like what he truly was, not a crime boss, not a man of power, but a person who had lost everything that mattered, standing in a fluorescent tomb, unable to save her. The diner door crashed open. Rain poured in sideways, carrying with it a woman who looked like she had been pulled from a grave. Allara Chen's right eye was swollen completely shut, purple and yellow bleeding into the whites of her face. A gash above her left eye dripped blood down her cheek in a thin line. Handprint bruises ringed her throat, dark and unmistakable, visible even beneath the soaked scarf she wore to hide them. Her clothes hung on her like borrowed skin. She was carrying everything she owned in a backpack that weighed almost nothing because she owned almost nothing. She had $200 in her pocket. $200 and a crumpled foreclosure notice that she checked every morning to make sure it was still real, still happening, still destroying her. Her one functioning eye found the child in the booth. Something changed in her face. The fear that had been carved into her features, the fear of Robert Hargrove, of his threats, of his hands, simply fell away like a mask discarded. She moved toward Emma without permission, without hesitation, without thinking. Dominic reached out to grab her arm. His hand stopped mid-motion. She dropped to her knees on that checkered floor, her soaked jeans immediately soaking through with spilled coffee and rain. Her hands, calloused from 6 months of volunteering at the children's shelter, from scrubbing floors, from washing her face in gas station bathrooms, moved with absolute precision across the child's face. She checked the airway. She tilted Emma's head back with the careful respect of someone who had done this 100 times in her mind and never in her life. "Come on, baby," she whispered, and her voice sounded like something breaking and being put back together in the same breath. "Come on." Allara began rescue breathing. 1 breath. 2. The paramedics moved forward but stopped. Vinny's hand went to his jacket but Gino touched his arm, held him still. Emma's small chest rose. It rose. It rose again. Then Emma gasped, a sound like a fish pulled from water, gasping for the element it needed to survive, and her eyes flickered open. Her pupils focused. Her hand moved. The silence in the diner became absolute except for the sound of rain hammering against the windows like something trying to get in, trying to get out, trying to break the moment into pieces so it could never be put back together the same way again. Dominic Corsetti stared at this woman kneeling beside his daughter. Stared at the blood running down her face. Stared at the trembling in her shoulders as she whispered Emma's name, as though she had known this child her entire life, as though this child was the only thing that had ever mattered in the world. "What is your name?" His voice came out like thunder wrapped in silk. Allara didn't look up from Emma. She smoothed the child's hair back with fingers that would not stop shaking. "Allara," she said. "Allara Chen. You saved her life." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, like gravity, like death, like something that could not be argued with or negotiated away. "She's breathing," Allara said. That was all she said. That was enough. One of the paramedics was on a radio now. Patient regained consciousness. Oxygen saturation climbing. We're moving. They lifted Emma carefully, so carefully, onto a stretcher. Allara moved out of the way but kept her hand on the child's shoulder until the last possible second. Emma's eyes found her and held on. "Will you come?" Emma asked. The child's voice was thin, paper thin, barely existing. "Will you come with me?" Allara looked at Dominic Corsetti. The most dangerous man in Louisiana stood 7 feet away in a soaked suit worth more than she would make in her entire lifetime. His dark eyes held hers. Something in his chest that had been locked since the day Emma disappeared, since the moment he realized his only child had been taken by someone, something came unlocked. "Yes," Allara said to Emma. "Yes, I will come." She didn't know. As she followed the paramedics toward the ambulance, as the rain soaked through her already soaked clothes, as the storm roared around the city like a living thing, Allara Chen did not know who this child was. Did not know that 3 weeks ago Emma had been pulled from a playground in the wealthy Garden District by a man named Marcus, who had been paid $8,000 by someone else to do it, someone with a reason to hurt Dominic Corsetti the way only a missing child could hurt a man. She did not know that the girl she had been singing to sleep for 3 weeks at the Children's Hope Shelter, the traumatized little girl who woke up screaming from nightmares and only calmed down when Allara held her hand, was the missing daughter of the most powerful crime boss in Louisiana. She did not know that her act of rescue, pure instinct, pure courage, pure love for a child who was not hers, had just bound her to a world she could not escape, to a man she could not refuse, to a fate she could not even imagine. But what Dominic Corsetti knew, as he stood in that neon-lit diner watching her disappear into the rain with his daughter, was that his entire world had just shifted on its axis. The November wind tore through the empty streets of New Orleans like a blade wrapped in ice. Allara Chen sat in the driver's seat of her 2003 Honda Civic and counted her money one more time, though she already knew the total. $17.43. She had 5 days before her phone bill was due. Her rent on the apartment had stopped getting paid 3 months ago. The foreclosure notice had been taped to her door on a Tuesday morning, official and terrible and final, declaring that the small one-bedroom unit where she had lived for 6 years would be taken by the bank on January 15th. She had circled that date on her calendar hanging above the sink. She had written it down in her phone notes. She had memorized it so completely that she could see it when she closed her eyes at night. January 15th, 74 days away. The Honda Civic was a 2003 model, silver paint faded to the color of old bones. The back seat was packed with everything she owned that wouldn't fit in the apartment. 2 suitcases. A box of books. Hangers with 3 work shirts. The passenger seat held her jacket, her wallet, and a rolled-up poster of a lighthouse that her mother had given her 23 years ago, back when Allara was still someone's daughter instead of a stranger to herself. She had been living in this car for 8 months. 8 months of washing her face in gas station bathrooms, of brushing her teeth with a travel toothbrush and bottled water, of driving to different parking lots so the police would not cite her for loitering, of pretending that she was waiting for someone instead of waiting for her life to begin again. The shelter opened its doors at 6:41 a.m. She could volunteer there, could work unpaid, scrubbing floors and preparing breakfast for abandoned children, and in exchange, Sister Catherine would let her sleep in the back room for 3 hours before dawn. A warm place. A place where the floor didn't vibrate when a truck drove past, where the ceiling didn't drip when it rained, where she could pretend for a few hours that she still had a home. Allara checked her phone. 5:02 a.m. She started the engine. The Civic coughed twice before turning over. She had put the last of her savings into a new alternator 3 weeks ago, a necessary surgery for a car that was barely alive. The logic was simple and terrible. The car was her shelter and her transportation, and without it, she had nothing. So she saved what she could, spent it on what might keep the engine running, and went hungry on the days when the money came down to a choice between eating or keeping the vehicle that allowed her to volunteer, which allowed her to sleep. The drive took 11 minutes. She drove past streets where she used to walk, past a coffee shop where she used to meet friends, past the grocery store where she used to buy fresh vegetables. All of it belonged to a different Allara Chen, a woman who had a salary and a social security number that wasn't destroying her, a woman who had believed in the future because she had earned it. That woman was dead. The Children's Hope Shelter sat on a quiet street in the 7th Ward, a converted house with faded blue paint and a chain-link fence around the yard. Inside, 23 children were sleeping on mats on the floor, children whose parents had lost custody, whose mothers had abandoned them at hospitals, whose fathers had never existed at all. Children who knew the full weight of the word unwanted. Sister Catherine was already in the kitchen, 72 years old and moving like her bones were made of conviction instead of calcium. She had founded this shelter 31 years ago with nothing but her faith and her fury at the world's cruelty to children. "You look like you haven't eaten," Sister Catherine said without turning around. "I ate yesterday," Allara said. It was not technically a lie. She had eaten yesterday. A single sandwich that a kind waitress at the diner had given her at closing time, one sandwich that she had split in half to make it last 2 meals. "Sit down," Sister Catherine said. "I'm not hungry, sister." "I did not ask if you were hungry. I said sit down." Allara sat at the long wooden table where the children ate their meals. Sister Catherine placed a bowl of oatmeal in front of her, topped with brown sugar and real butter. The smell alone made Allara's eyes burn. "Eat," Sister Catherine commanded. Allara picked up the spoon and began eating. The oatmeal was warm and real and tasted like salvation, and she had to stop twice because her throat was closing up with the kind of crying that comes from being cared for when you have stopped expecting it. "How much longer can you keep living like this?" Sister Catherine asked. Allara did not answer. She did not have an answer. The truth was that she could keep living like this until she couldn't. Until the weather got cold enough to be dangerous. Until she got sick and didn't have money for medicine. Until Robert Hargrove found her again, and he would find her, eventually, because men like him did not let go of their prey. "You are smart, Allara. You could work here. I could give you a room in the back house. It would not be much, but it would be something." "Sister," Allara said quietly, "I cannot accept charity. It is not charity. It is employment. I need someone to help me manage this place, and you have been doing it unpaid for 8 months. Let me pay you what you are worth." Allara looked up. "How much?" $400 a month. "And a room. And food." $400 a month. It was not much. It would not save her apartment. It would not stop the foreclosure. It would not erase the debt she owed to 3 different credit card companies, would not pay the hospital bill from the emergency room visit for months ago, would not bring her mother back from the dead or give her father a reason to acknowledge that she existed. But it was something. It was breathing room. "Thank you," Allara whispered. "Do not thank me yet," Sister Catherine said. "This job comes with a responsibility. Children here need someone who understands loss. Someone who knows what it means to be abandoned. I think you understand that, Allara. I think you understand it very well." Allara did not argue. Instead, she finished her oatmeal and got up and began preparing breakfast for 23 children who would wake up soon and file into this kitchen like small soldiers in a war nobody was winning. And that was when Emma arrived. She came on a Thursday morning with a social worker named David who looked exhausted in the way that people who worked with broken children always looked exhausted. Emma was 6 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that fell down her back in tangles. Her clothes were new but she wore them wrong, like they did not belong to her body. Her eyes were the color of slate after a storm, gray and empty and old in a way that children's eyes should never be old. She was found near a parking garage in the Garden District, David said quietly, in the tone people used when they were speaking about tragedy in front of the person who had experienced it. She was alone. She cannot or will not say her name or where she came from. No one has reported her missing. She does not match any missing children databases. We're running DNA tests but... He trailed off. The implication was clear. No one was looking for her. No one had reported her gone. Emma was a ghost child, the kind of disappearance that only mattered if someone had loved her enough to notice she was gone. "I will take her," Allara said. David looked surprised. "You do not have to. Sister Catherine can." "I will take her," Allara repeated. She knelt down so she was at eye level with Emma. The child stared at her with those slate-colored eyes and did not flinch, did not move, barely seemed to breathe. "Hello, Emma," Allara said, using the name that David had given her because the child had not offered her own. "I am Allara. Would you like to see your room?" Emma did not speak. She did not take Alara's hand. But she stood up and followed her through the hallway to room 4, a small space with a single bed with clean sheets, a window that looked out onto the street, and walls that were painted a soft yellow color that was supposed to suggest hope. Allara sat down on the bed. Emma stood in the doorway. "You do not have to talk if you do not want to talk," Allara said. "I understand. But I want you to know that you are safe here. No one will hurt you here. No one will take you from here. You can stay as long as you need to stay." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry. The tears just sat there, balanced on her lower lids, refusing to fall. "I sing sometimes," Allara continued quietly. "When I am sad or scared. Would you like me to sing?" She began to sing. Not a lullaby. Allara had no lullabies in her, no soft memories of being sung to by a loving mother. Instead, she sang a folk song her father had taught her years ago, a song about a girl who walked through a forest and found her way home. By the end of the first verse, Emma had moved to the bed and sat beside her. By the end of the second verse, the child's head was leaning against Allara's shoulder. And Allara Chen, who owned nothing, who had lost everything, who had $17.43 in her wallet and a crumpled foreclosure notice in her backpack, held this small broken child and sang about finding your way home, even though neither of them knew where home was anymore. The rain fell outside. The city moved on without them. And two ghosts, one old and one young, sat in a small yellow room and pretended that they were no longer alone. 8 months earlier, on a quiet Tuesday morning in March when the New Orleans air still held traces of winter coolness, Allara Chen stood in her kitchen and counted her tips from the previous night's shift at Café Dauphine. $17.43. She laid the bills and coins on the small yellow laminate counter, spreading them out as if the act of displaying them might somehow multiply their value. The kitchen was barely large enough for two people to stand in without touching, a cramped galley with white appliances from 1987 and a window that looked out onto a brick wall, but it was hers. The apartment was hers. She had signed the lease herself, a one-bedroom on Dauphine Street with yellow curtains she had sewn herself from fabric she found on clearance at the craft store. She had a job as a pediatric nursing assistant at Tulane Medical Center, working 3 to 11 shifts, changing dressings on children's wounds and reading stories to kids who were too afraid to sleep in hospital beds. She had a boyfriend named Robert Hargrove who sold commercial insurance and drove a 2019 BMW and took her to dinner on Fridays. She had a life that, while not wealthy, felt solid. It felt like it belonged to her. She placed the $17.43 into a mason jar on the shelf next to her grandmother's photograph, a framed black and white image of a Vietnamese woman with kind eyes and hands folded in her lap. Her grandmother had immigrated to America in 1978 with nothing but a cloth bag containing 2 photographs and a change of clothes. She had worked in a silk factory for 42 years. She had raised 3 children. She had sung lullabies in a language Allara was only beginning to remember. In the photograph, her grandmother was 23 years old, the same age Allara was now, though her grandmother's face held a gravity that Allara's did not. A knowledge of survival already written into the bone structure. Allara touched the frame gently. "I am getting there, Grandma," she whispered. "I am building something." The footsteps came at 6:36 in the evening. Robert had a key. She had given him a key 6 months into their relationship because that is what people did when they were building a future together. The door opened without warning. He did not call out a greeting. She was in the bedroom, hanging fresh sheets on the mattress, and when she heard the door slam she knew something was wrong. His breathing sounded different. Heavier. Like something large was moving through the apartment, displacing air. She turned to face him as he filled the doorway. Robert Hargrove was 32 years old and carried himself like a man who had never been told no. He was tall, with the kind of muscular build that came from expensive gym memberships and personal trainers. His hair was dark and always perfectly styled. His suit had cost more than Allara's entire monthly rent. But his eyes were different tonight. They were narrowed to slits. His jaw was locked so tight she could see the muscle pulsing beneath his skin. "You are late," he said. His voice was soft. That was the worst part. When Robert was angry, his voice got softer, not louder. Like a blade wrapped in ice. "I am not late. I got home at 5:30. I told you I was stopping at the grocery. You said 4 o'clock. No, I said around 5. The shift ran over. A child came in with a fractured." His hand moved so fast she did not see it coming. One moment she was standing at the foot of the bed and the next his fingers were wrapped around her throat, pressing into the soft skin on both sides of her windpipe. The pressure was immediate and total. She could not breathe. She could not scream. She could only feel the iron grip of his hand and the sound of her own panicked gasping. Her vision started to narrow at the edges, like someone was slowly closing a pair of dark curtains. "You lie to me," he said quietly. "You make me look stupid. You come home late and you lie about it and you expect me to just accept that because you have some bullshit story about work." His thumb pressed harder into her throat. The world tilted. "You are mine, Allara. Everything you do reflects on me. Everything you say reflects on me. Do you understand?" She tried to nod but could not move her head. She made a sound, a wheeze, a whimper, something less than human. He released her suddenly and she fell backward onto the bed, gasping for air, her throat burning. He stood there for a moment, looking down at her like she was something repulsive. Then he turned and walked out of the bedroom. She heard him in the living room, opening the refrigerator, pouring a drink. The ice cubes clinked in a glass like they were the most natural thing in the world. Like choking someone was no different than getting a snack. Allara pulled her knees to her chest. Her hands were shaking so badly she could not hold them still. The marks of his fingers were already blooming across her throat in shades of purple and red that would yellow within 24 hours. She pulled her hair down to cover them. She waited in the bedroom for 2 hours until she heard him snoring from the couch in the living room. Then she crept out and locked herself in the bathroom and cried so quietly that he would not hear. The neighbors had heard. Mrs. Broussard in 2C heard her screaming. But Mrs. Broussard did not call the police. Robert's cousin was a sergeant in the NOPD 2nd District. Everyone on Dauphine Street knew this. Everyone understood what this meant. 3 weeks later, Robert came home drunk and angry because his boss had criticized his quarterly sales numbers. He found her making dinner. He found something wrong with the way she was standing. The way she was breathing. The way she existed. When she tried to get away from him, he grabbed her left wrist and twisted it backward until it snapped with a sound like a piece of wood breaking in half. The pain was so complete, so all-consuming, that she fainted. She woke up in the emergency room at Tulane Medical Center where she had worked for 18 months. The ER doctor was Dr. Santos, who had always been kind to her. He looked at her wrist and then at her face and then at her wrist again. He did not ask questions. He just set the bone and placed it in a cast and wrote down her injuries on the chart in clinical detail. A doctor's job was to document. His hands were kind even when his words had to be professional. She called the police from a hospital phone. Officer Mitchell arrived 45 minutes later. He was the same officer Robert's cousin had introduced Robert to at a Saints game. He took her statement, she gave it to him in a small room off the ER, sitting in a plastic chair, her left wrist throbbing with a pain so intense she could not focus on his words. She told him what Robert had done. She described the attack. She showed him her wrist. Officer Mitchell listened with an expression that was not quite a smile but not quite neutral either. When she finished, he opened a small notebook where he had written maybe 4 lines of notes. He read it back to himself. Then, his eyes still on the page, he crumpled it into a ball. The sound of the paper crushing was loud in the small room. "Miss Chen, I think you might be confused about what happened," he said. His voice was kind. That was the cruelest part. These kinds of injuries happen all the time. People fall. They slip. Sometimes partners argue and things get out of hand, but that does not make it a criminal matter. Sometimes we have to take responsibility for our own safety, you understand? If you are getting injured, maybe it is because you are not being careful enough. Maybe you need to pay better attention. She tried to speak, but he was already standing. "I will not be filing any charges," he said. "If you want to pursue this further, you are welcome to seek a protective order, but I think you should go home and talk to your boyfriend. I think you should be more careful about how you conduct yourself. Take care of that wrist." He left her sitting in the plastic chair. The crumpled ball of paper was on the table next to her. She could not work with a cast. Pediatric nursing required 2 functional hands. 2 weeks after she was let go from Tulane, her landlord changed the locks. Robert had convinced her to give him her name on the lease so he could help her build credit. Now her name was attached to nothing, and the bank statement she received in the mail showed a foreclosure notice printed in aggressive black letters. She had 90 days to vacate the apartment. Everything she owned was placed in black garbage bags and left on the sidewalk on Dauphine Street on a Tuesday morning. Her clothes, her books, her grandmother's photograph in its frame, her yellow curtains still folded in their plastic package. Robert watched from across the street, smoking a cigarette, smiling. She lived in her 2003 Honda Civic for the next week, until the transmission started making a sound like a wounded animal dying slowly in the engine block. But the car still ran. It still had a back seat where she could lie down at night. It had a steering wheel and headlights and a cassette player that only worked if you hit it on the left side first. She parked in different locations each night: a parking lot behind a closed grocery store, the street near the levee, the driveway of a church that did not monitor its property. She was afraid that if she stayed in one place too long, someone would report her and police would come, and Robert had connections with police. She washed her face each morning at 5 a.m. in the public bathroom at the Texaco gas station on Canal Street. The bathroom was filthy and smelled like bleach and human waste, but it had a sink with running water and a mirror. She brushed her teeth with water from a gallon jug she kept in the car. She rationed her money carefully. She had $382 in a checking account. Rent on any apartment she could afford would be $800 a month. The math did not work. The math had never worked, really. She had just been lucky enough not to notice it before. 3 weeks after she became homeless, she discovered the Sacred Heart Children's Shelter on Burgundy Street. It was a narrow 3-story building painted white, with a blue door and windows that had been barred from the inside. The director was a woman named Mrs. Baptiste, 67 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and the kind of face that had learned how to show love through discipline. Allara went to the shelter looking for a meal. They served dinner to anyone who came through the door. What she found instead was Mrs. Baptiste looking at her and seeing something that made her pause. "How long have you been living in that car?" Mrs. Baptiste asked. Allara did not lie. There was no point. Her clothes were filthy. Her skin was grayish from lack of sunlight. Her left wrist, still healing, was wrapped in an old cloth because she could not afford another medical visit. 8 days, Allara whispered. Mrs. Baptiste was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We have a break room with a cot. Our overnight volunteer just quit. If you are willing to work a shift from 9 in the evening until 6 in the morning, you can sleep here. You will be fed. We have a shower. It is not much, but it is something." Something. For Allara, something had become everything. The shelter housed between 4 and 7 children at any given time. They were children with nowhere else to go. Children removed from homes where the violence was systematic. Children who had been abandoned at hospitals and police stations. Children who had survived things that no child should survive. Emma arrived on a Tuesday in late June, brought in by a police officer who had found her wandering on Esplanade Avenue at 3 in the morning, barefoot, wearing a dress with a pattern of small blue flowers, unable to speak her own name. She was 6 years old. She had copper-colored hair and eyes that were the color of storm clouds. She flinched at sudden movements. She did not make eye contact. She did not speak. When Mrs. Baptiste tried to get her to eat, Emma would shake her head and turn away. She seemed to be listening to sounds that no one else could hear. Allara was assigned to care for her during the night shifts. This meant sitting with her when she woke up screaming from nightmares. This meant singing to her in the dark. This meant showing her that some hands could be gentle. The first time Emma allowed Allara to touch her hair, to brush it gently with her fingers, Allara felt something shift in her own chest. Some small part of the darkness that had been growing there since Robert's fingers first closed around her throat began to recede. She taught Emma a Vietnamese lullaby her grandmother had taught her. The words meant nothing to the child, but the melody was soothing. The melody was a promise that someone was there, awake in the dark, keeping watch while she slept. But Robert kept finding her. Somehow, he always found her. He drove past the shelter on Burgundy Street. He waited in the parking lot. He watched her through the fence. And on a hot Tuesday night 5 days before the summer thunderstorm, when Allara stepped out of the shelter at 8 in the evening to walk to the corner store for milk, he was waiting in the darkness. He grabbed her by the arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbow. He slammed her back against the brick wall of the shelter. His breath smelled of bourbon and cigarettes. His smile was the smile of someone who had never suffered any consequences for anything he had ever done. "I have been looking for you," he said softly. "Do you know how humiliating this has been for me? My girlfriend living in a car? People asking questions? Do you know how stupid you have made me look? Robert, please. I am working. I have to go back inside." His hand came up and closed around her throat again. The same motion. The same crushing pressure. After all these months, her body remembered exactly what this felt like. Panic. Suffocation. The animal instinct to fight and claw and survive. "You belong to me," he said. "You will always belong to me. If I cannot have you, no one will have you. I want you to understand that. I want that to be clear in your head every single moment of every single day. You are mine." He released her and she slumped against the wall, gasping. He walked away, leaving her there on the ground, her vision swimming, her throat screaming. That night, Emma found her in the bathroom, crying silently into a washcloth. The child had a gift for sensing pain. She did not ask questions. She simply sat next to Allara and placed one small hand on her shoulder, like she was the one offering comfort. And then the summer storm came. On July 16th, the Weather Service issued warnings. Humidity hung over New Orleans like a shroud. The sky turned a sickly greenish-yellow color. By evening, the first lightning crackled across the sky like a rupture in the fabric of the night. Allara was supposed to work the overnight shift at the shelter. She prepared Emma for bed, singing the lullaby, staying until the child's breathing deepened into something like sleep. At 11 o'clock, she left to walk to the 24-hour pharmacy on the corner to get medication for one of the other children. Robert was waiting in the alley behind the Walgreens. She did not see him until it was too late. He came out of the shadows like something formed from them, and his first punch landed in her stomach, driving all the air from her body. She fell to her knees and he kicked her in the ribs. Once, twice, 3 times. The pain was white and complete. She tried to crawl away, tried to reach the street where there might be people, might be witnesses, but he grabbed her hair and pulled her backward. His fists came down on her face, her shoulders, her arms that she tried to raise to protect herself. Blood filled her mouth. One eye swelled shut. She was dying. She was absolutely certain she was dying. And then, somehow, a delivery truck turned into the alley. Headlights cut through the darkness. Robert cursed, and he ran, disappearing back into the rain. Allara lay in the alley for she did not know how long. The rain fell on her face. She could hear the city moving around her, cars passing on the street, a siren in the distance, the rumble of thunder that sounded like something ancient and angry. She managed to get to her feet. Her vision was blurred. Her entire body screamed. But she was moving. She stumbled out of the alley and into the wet street. The rain came down harder, sheets of it, soaking through her clothes. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to get away. She had to get somewhere safe. She had to get back to Emma. She walked for what felt like an eternity, her body breaking down with each step. And then she saw lights. A small diner with a neon sign, warm light spilling out onto the wet pavement. She pushed through the door and collapsed into the fluorescent brightness, bleeding and broken, her one good eye searching the faces of the people inside, desperate and terrified, not knowing that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The fluorescent lights of Dorfine's diner hummed their tired song at 3:47 in the morning. The neon Budweiser sign above the counter cast everything in electric blue and sickly red, reflecting off the black and white checkered linoleum that was slick with rain tracked in from the street. Outside, the summer storm hammered the metal awning with the rhythm of something alive and angry. Inside, the air hung thick with stale coffee and grease from the deep fryer, that particular smell of a place that never truly closed, never truly rested. Allara pushed through the glass door and collapsed into a corner booth like her bones had suddenly forgotten their purpose. Her hand shook so badly she could not open her backpack to find the napkins she kept for emergencies. Blood dripped from the cut above her eye onto the laminate tabletop. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut. Her throat bore the purple shape of fingers, his fingers, pressed into her skin like a brand. The night waitress, a woman named Donna with tired eyes and orthopedic shoes worn down at the heels, approached without judgment. She did not ask questions. She simply set down a glass of water and whispered, "I won't call nobody if you don't want me to, hun." Allara pressed napkins to her face, and the white cloth bloomed red. Lightning split the sky outside. Thunder followed so close it rattled the windows. 3 minutes later, a black Mercedes pulled smoothly to the curb despite the downpour. A man emerged first. Vinny. His suit remained immaculate despite the storm, every seam perfect, every button aligned. He moved through the diner scanning every corner with the paranoia of someone trained to identify threats in crowded spaces. Behind him came another man, Gino, broader in the shoulders, carrying something wrapped in a grey blanket. A small thing. Small and still. Then Dominic Corsetti walked through the door and the temperature in Dorfine's diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was 6'3" with black hair swept back from his forehead, a scar running along his left jawline like a question mark written in pale skin. His suit cost more than Allara had earned in 6 months at her old nursing job, a lifetime ago, when she still had health insurance and a reason to set an alarm. But his face was stripped of all the power and control he normally wore like armor. He was terrified. Raw and exposed and terrified. Gino laid the child in a booth. She was small. So impossibly small. Her skin held a grayish pallor. Her breathing came shallow and irregular, like she was forgetting the rhythm and having to relearn it with each exhale. Allara's heart stopped. She knew this child. This was Emma. The same girl who had appeared at Sacred Heart Shelter 3 weeks ago with no name and no words. The girl Allara had read to every single night, the Velveteen Rabbit and fairy tales and anything to fill the silence. The girl who had finally, whispered her name 2 days ago. Just one word. Just Lemma. But it had been everything. Dominic fell to his knees beside the booth and his voice cracked when he spoke his daughter's name. That sound, a grown man's voice breaking, was the sound of the world ending and beginning at the same moment. Vinny was already on his phone. "We need paramedics. Tulane Medical Center. Now." Child, approximately 6 years old, respiratory distress, unconscious. "Yes. We are waiting." And Allara did not think. She moved. She was out of her booth and beside Emma, her bloody hands reaching for the girl's small, pale face. She tilted Emma's head back slightly, opened the airway, put her mouth over the child's nose and mouth, her training from the old life, the one before Robert, before homelessness, before everything broke, and breathed. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. Her ribs screamed with pain from the kicks in the alley, but she did not stop. She breathed air into Emma until the small body beneath her hands gasped and choked and suddenly, desperately, began breathing on its own. Emma's eyes fluttered open. The first thing she saw was Allara's bloodied face. "Lara," Emma whispered, and reached for her with both small hands. Dominic looked at Allara for the first time, really looked at her, and saw the swollen eye, the blood, the bruises blooming like flowers across her throat, the way her entire body trembled, but her hands remained steady and gentle on his daughter. He asked one question in a voice like gravel grinding beneath stone. "Who did this to you?" Allara shook her head. Could not answer. The paramedics arrived for minutes later. They assessed Emma quickly, professionally, began talking about Tulane Medical Center, about dehydration, about needing to run tests. But Emma was clinging to Allara, her small hands twisted in the fabric of Allara's shirt, her breathing accelerating into panic at the mention of separation. "No. No, no, no. Lara stays. Lara stays." Dominic made a decision. He pointed at Allara and spoke to the paramedics in a voice that was not a request. "She comes with you. She stays with Emma. You keep her calm and you keep her safe, or you will not like what happens next." Allara tried to refuse. She opened her mouth to say she could not, she should not, she knew who he was, everyone in New Orleans knew who Dominic Corsetti was, but Emma was crying, her small body rigid with trauma, and Allara could not abandon her. She climbed into the Mercedes, still wearing her blood-stained clothes, still carrying her backpack containing everything she owned in this world. The rain fell harder as they drove through the sleeping streets of New Orleans. At Tulane Medical Center, they took the service elevator to the 8th floor. The hallway was empty of visitors, lined with private suites that did not appear on any hospital directory. Dominic's private physician, Dr. Nguyen, was already waiting. She examined Emma with gentle efficiency while Dominic paced the suite like a caged animal, his shoulders tense, his jaw working. Emma was stable. Dehydrated. Showing signs of psychological trauma. She would not let go of Allara's hand. Dominic pulled Allara into the hallway. Vinny and Gino stood guard at either end, their presence a wall of silence. "What is your name?" he asked. "Allara Chen." "You know my daughter. She has been at Sacred Heart Shelter for 3 weeks. I volunteer there. I did not know she was yours, she would not tell anyone her name." Something shifted in his expression. This woman, this injured, homeless woman, had been caring for his missing daughter while he tore the city apart searching. "The injuries," he said. "Tell me how you got them." She tried to deflect, but he waited with the patience of a man who always gets answers. The silence stretched like a living thing. Finally, she whispered the name. Robert Hargrove. Her ex-boyfriend. She told him about the surveillance, the stalking, the way the police reports disappeared when she filed them because Robert had connections, had Officer Mitchell in his pocket, had the kind of influence that made justice bend into shapes that suited him. Dominic's jaw tightened. He made a phone call. 10 minutes later, a woman arrived, Dr. Sarah Reeves, a trauma specialist who carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen the absolute worst of human damage and learned not to flinch. "Dominic, Dr. Reeves will examine your injuries. Everything is paid for. No arguments." "Allara, why would you help me? I am nobody." His eyes met hers and held them. "You saved my daughter's life while trained paramedics stood frozen. You are not nobody." Vinny and Gino exchanged a look neither had shown in 15 years of working for Dominic Corsetti. Dr. Reeves' examination revealed cracked rib on the left side, severe contusions across her back and shoulders, the cut above her eye requiring for stitches, possible concussion. The bill was $4,700. When Allara saw the number on the printed receipt, she started crying because $4,700 was a chasm she could never cross. She had $200. That was all. That was everything. Dr. Reeves gently told her it was already handled. At 2 in the morning, Allara sat in a chair beside Emma's hospital bed, refusing to leave even though exhaustion made her vision blur and every breath hurt. Dominic brought her coffee from the hospital cafeteria. He sat across from her, not above her, and they talked. "How did she go missing?" Allara asked. His face darkened like a storm moving in. "My brother," he said. "Marcus. I trusted him with everything, with my business, my family, my life. He was my only blood. But he decided trust was something he could sell." Dominic's voice remained flat, but his hands gripped the coffee cup hard enough to turn his knuckles white. He gave information about Emma's school, her security detail, her routine. He sold it to the Giordanos. They wanted leverage. They wanted to take what mattered to me and use it to destroy everything I built. "What happened?" Allara whispered. "They took her. 3 weeks ago. The plan was ransom, but something went wrong. They abandoned her on the street when police started searching. Marcus disappeared the same night. His eyes met hers and in them lived a darkness she could not comprehend. I had to choose between mercy for my brother and protecting my family. I chose survival." He did not say what happened to Marcus. His eyes said enough. "Is that why Emma will not talk about what happened?" Allara asked. "The trauma of abandonment. Of betrayal by family." Her voice locked itself away. He paused. "Until you." Allara told him about the Vietnamese lullabies, about reading The Velveteen Rabbit every night, about how Emma finally whispered her name 2 days ago. How that one word had meant everything. When morning came, Allara washed her face in the hospital bathroom and stared at her reflection, one eye still swollen, stitches black and precise above the other, bruises blooming in shades of purple and yellow across her throat. She pulled out the crumpled foreclosure notice from her backpack with trembling hands. The final notice for her grandmother's house. The one she had lost 6 months ago. The one she would never get back. There was a knock. Vinny entered. "Mr. Corsetti wants to see you in his office," he said. Dominic's office was in a renovated warehouse in the Garden District. Exposed brick walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private courtyard with a stone fountain. Expensive leather furniture. A massive oak desk. Security monitors showing every angle of the property. He sat across from her, not behind the desk. "Emma needs stability," he began. "She needs someone familiar, someone she trusts, while she heals. The therapists say forcing her back into routine too quickly could cause more damage. I have a proposition." Allara waited. "Live-in caregiver for Emma. Private room in my house. Salary of $4,000 per month. All expenses covered. Healthcare. Everything you need." The words did not make sense. $4,000 per month. Allara had made $9 an hour at the shelter. She had been living in her car. "I am homeless," she said. "I have nothing. Why would you trust me in your home?" "Because when everyone else froze, you acted. Because my daughter has not smiled in 3 weeks until you held her. Because I have spent 15 years building an empire and none of it means anything if I cannot keep her safe. And you, with $200 in your pocket and a sleeping bag in your car, you did what all my power could not do." Allara's voice shook when she said yes. That afternoon, they arrived at the Corsetti mansion in the Garden District. Iron gates. Security cameras at every corner. Guards standing in the rain with their eyes moving constantly. The house was 3 stories of restored antebellum architecture, all white columns and tall windows. Her room was larger than her entire old apartment. Emma's room was across the hall. When Emma saw that Allara was staying, that this was not temporary, she wrapped her small arms around her and cried with relief. But that evening, trouble arrived in two forms. First came Robert. At 7 o'clock, he showed up at the front gate, drunk and screaming Allara's name into the downpour. His voice cracked and bent with rage. Security cameras captured him pounding the iron bars, his fists leaving blood smears on the metal. Vinny and two guards went out to deal with him. From an upstairs window, Allara watched. Robert pulled a knife. Vinny disarmed him in 4 seconds flat. Robert collapsed on the ground whimpering, his courage dissolving like sugar in water. Vinny's voice carried up to the window, "You come near this property again, they will find pieces of you in the river. Understand?" Robert stumbled away, but his eyes promised this was not finished. Second came Evelyn Blackwell. That night, she arrived in designer clothes and false concern, ostensibly to welcome Emma home. Evelyn was beautiful in the way that cold things are beautiful, perfectly maintained, precisely calculated, dangerous. She had been angling to become Mrs. Dominic Corsetti for 2 years. She ran half the city's charity boards and owned 3 galleries in the French Quarter. She smiled like a blade wrapped in velvet. Allara watched from the hallway as Evelyn stood in Dominic's study. "Darling, people are talking," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You have installed some shelter girl as a live-in nanny? What will the families think?" Dominic's voice dropped to ice. "I do not care what they think. Emma needs her. She is nobody. She has no background, no credentials, no class. This reflects poorly on you. That nobody saved my daughter's life." Evelyn's smile tightened. She glanced at Allara through the doorway where Allara was reading to Emma, tucking her under a white blanket. Evelyn's eyes made a promise written in pure cruelty. Later, Allara put Emma to bed, singing a soft lullaby in Vietnamese, the language her grandmother had sung to her. Outside, through the window, she could see Robert's silhouette across the street, watching and waiting in the rain. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. The rain hammered against the windows of Allara's room in thick, relentless sheets. 2 o'clock in the morning. The kind of hour where hope goes to die. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling so violently that the piece of paper in front of her looked like it was vibrating. The crumpled foreclosure notice lay on the nightstand next to $200 in cash. Everything she owned in the world. Everything. She had been here 72 hours. 3 days. That was all it took to forget what hunger felt like, what it meant to sleep on a vinyl car seat, what the cold of a gas station bathroom sink felt like against her face at 4 in the morning. 3 days to begin believing that maybe, just maybe, she could have a different life. And now she would lose it all because she was poison. Because staying here meant death. Because Emma deserved protection, not danger. Her pen shook as she began writing the letter. The words came in jagged bursts, barely legible across the page. "Dominic," she started, then stopped. She did not have the right to use his name so informally. She crossed it out and started again. "Mr. Corsetti." The pen scratched across the paper. She wrote about gratitude. She wrote about Emma, how special Emma was, how brave, how she deserved a father like him, a real father who would move mountains to protect her. She wrote that she understood now, after the garden, after the gunshot, after seeing Robert's blood on the paving stones, that she could not stay. Robert would keep coming. He had already proven he could breach the outer fence. Next time he might succeed. Next time Emma might not be fast enough to run. She wrote that she was sorry. That she had imagined, for just these 72 hours, what it would feel like to belong somewhere. To have a purpose that was not survival. To fall asleep without fear. She had tasted safety for the first time since her grandmother died, and it tasted like vanilla and warmth and Emma's small hand in hers. Then she wrote the thing that broke her, in another life, maybe I could have been someone worthy of your world. Her vision blurred. She signed it simply Allara and placed the letter on the dresser, weighting it down with the foreclosure notice so it would not blow away when she opened the window to climb down the trellis. She would leave before dawn. She would disappear into the city, into the street she knew how to navigate, into the hunger she knew how to endure. She would protect them by vanishing. It was the only language her life had ever taught her to speak. She reached for her backpack. It still held the same clothes she had arrived in, the same worn shoes, the same desperation folded into every thread. She had not unpacked. Some part of her had always known this was temporary. Some part of her had always remembered that girls like her did not stay. Her hand froze on the doorknob. On the outside of the door, taped at her eye level, was a crayon drawing. The paper was still wet from watercolor paint, the colors bleeding into each other like a watercolor sky at sunset. 3 stick figures. Crude. Child's hand. Each one labeled in Emma's careful, still learning letters, EMM8LARARDADDY. Daddy. Allara's breath caught. She slid down the wall, her back against the doorframe, and for the first time since the night in the diner, she broke. The tears came like a flood after drought, like a dam that had finally found its breaking point. They came for every night in the car. Every meal she had skipped so Emma would have food at the shelter. Every time she had whispered promises to children she could not keep. Every time she had felt the full weight of being nobody, invisible, disposable. She did not hear Dominic enter the study downstairs. She did not know he was already moving. 11 o'clock that same night, before Allara had even finished her letter. The study smelled of mahogany and aged scotch. The kind of room where men made decisions that changed lives. Dominic sat across from Vinny and Gino. His face was carved from stone. His hands rested on the mahogany desk, flat and controlled, but something dark and dangerous was moving behind his eyes. Something that had been unleashed the moment he saw the gun pointed at Emma in the garden. Something that had been simmering since the moment Robert Hargrove looked at his daughter and saw only leverage. Robert Hargrove, Dominic said, his voice flat as a blade. I want everything. Where he lives. Where he drinks. Every cop on his payroll. I want the Giordano family connection. I want Evelyn Blackwell's financials, every gallery, every account, every dirty deal she has ever made. I want it all. Tonight. Vinny exchanged a glance with Gino. This was a Dominic Corsetti they had learned to recognize over 15 years, but only in glimpses. The version of him that ended problems permanently. What are you planning? Vinny asked carefully. Justice, Dominic said. Real justice. The kind the law refuses to provide. By 4 in the morning, the intelligence was complete. Robert Hargrove rented a house in Metairie, connected to the Giordano family through Officer Mitchell, a corrupt cop feeding them police movements in exchange for cash. Evelyn Blackwell had been laundering drug money through her galleries for 3 years, buying art at inflated prices, selling it to shell companies, cleaning the Giordano's cash in the process. She was not a social climber playing at charity boards. She was complicit with the same family that had stolen Emma. Everything connected. A perfect web. A perfect circle of cruelty. At 6 in the morning, Dominic made his move. 12 men in tactical black moved through New Orleans in the pre-dawn darkness like ghosts. No sirens. No announcements. Just systematic, surgical precision. The kind of operation that leaves no fingerprints, no trace, nothing but results. Team 1 hit Robert's rental house in Metairie at 6:15. They came through the front door and 3 windows simultaneously. Robert woke to find Vinny standing over his bed, his face calm as stone, for men blocking every exit. Robert's eyes went wide. His hands went for the lamp, for the gun under the pillow, but there was nowhere to go. Nowhere to run. He tried anyway. He lunged for the window. Gino caught him with one hand, his grip like a vice. Robert collapsed onto the floor trembling like a cornered animal, his body understanding what his mind could not accept. There was no escape. Please, he gasped, his voice cracking. Please, I will leave the city. I will never contact her again. I will disappear. Please. Vinny's voice came out emotionless, dead calm. You pointed a gun at a 6-year-old child. Mr. Corsetti does not forgive that. They dragged Robert out in handcuffs, his screams echoing down the street. But he was not going to police. He was not going to a cell with bail and a trial. He was going into a black van driven by Giordano family soldiers, delivered like a wrapped gift with photographs of every crime he had committed, every cop he had bribed, every rule he had broken. The Giordanos, desperate to make peace with Dominic Corsetti after the Emma kidnapping disaster, accepted the offering. Robert Hargrove vanished into their world, a man traded like currency, used and broken and discarded, somewhere in the labyrinth of New Orleans underworld where men like him become less than ghosts. Death would have been too quick. Too easy. Too merciful. Meanwhile, across the city at her penthouse in the French Quarter, Evelyn Blackwell slept the sleep of the untouchable. Silk pajamas. 1,000-thread Egyptian cotton. No alarms in her world. No warnings. At 6:47, federal agents knocked down her door. She woke to the sound of her bedroom window exploding inward and men in windbreakers shouting federal identifications. She woke screaming, her perfect world shattering like crystal on marble. By 7 in the morning, she was in handcuffs, her face captured on every news camera in New Orleans, her penthouse being photographed from every angle as federal agents carried out boxes of documents. The charges came rapid fire: conspiracy to commit money laundering, racketeering, tax evasion. 40 counts. 40 years minimum federal prison time. Her galleries seized. Her bank accounts frozen. By 8 in the morning, her society friends were deleting her number before their coffee got cold. The women who had smiled at her luncheons and promised loyalty were suddenly unreachable. The families who had courted her for connections were pretending they had never heard her name. Total systematic destruction. Not death, something far more devastating. A slow, methodical erasure. The complete annihilation of everything she believed she was. Officer Mitchell was arrested 2 hours later on corruption charges. The network that had protected Robert Hargrove collapsed in a single morning, buried under federal warrants and airtight evidence that Dominic had ensured could never be questioned, never be challenged, never be escaped. By 9 o'clock, it was finished. Allara woke at 7, her eyes swollen from crying, and saw the letter still on the dresser. She had fallen asleep on the floor against the door, Emma's drawing still clutched in her hands. The paper was crumpled now, the color smeared where her tears had fallen. She walked downstairs on unsteady legs. Dominic was in the kitchen making coffee. Emma was at the table, coloring a picture of a house with a garden. Everything felt impossibly normal. Impossibly like a morning that belonged to someone else's life. Dominic looked up as Allara entered. His face was calm, but his eyes held something new, something that had shifted in the darkness while she was sleeping. "Robert Hargrove will never hurt you again," he said simply. "Neither will anyone he knew. You are safe now." Allara's voice came out barely a whisper. "What did you do? What should have been done 8 months ago? What the law refused to do?" He paused, his gaze steady on her face. "Justice." The news was playing on the television in the background. Evelyn Blackwell in handcuffs, her face white with shock. Officer Mitchell being escorted from the police station. Federal raids. Money laundering operations. The entire network unraveling in real time. Allara understood. She understood everything. Emma ran to her and wrapped her arms around Allara's legs, humming softly. Allara knelt and pulled her close, breathing in the scent of watercolor paint and shampoo and childhood. Dominic set the coffee cup down slowly. "The letter on your dresser. Were you going to leave?" Allara froze. He knew. Of course he knew. She nodded, unable to form words. "Read it to me." "I cannot," she whispered. He pulled the letter from his pocket. He must have gone to her room while she slept, must have stood in that moment and read every word she had written about unworthiness and danger and gratitude. His voice was steady as he read it aloud, each sentence a truth she had been too broken to speak to his face. When he finished, there was only silence and Emma's soft humming and the rain beginning again outside. "You think you endanger her?" Dominic said. "You saved her twice now. In the diner. In the garden when you stepped in front of a gun." He moved closer, his gaze unwavering. "You think you are poison? You are the reason she is healing. You think you are nobody? You are the person who acted when everyone else froze. You are not leaving. Not unless you want to. But if you stay as family. Not as an employee. Not as charity. As someone who belongs here." The tears came again, but this time they were different. This time they tasted like staying. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. 3 months later, the afternoon sun painted the Audubon Park in shades of gold and amber, and Emma ran ahead of Allara and Dominic with her small arms spread wide like she was trying to fly. The 6-year-old wore a yellow sundress now instead of the grey shelter clothes, and her laughter, that sound that had once been so rare it felt like a miracle, echoed across the lawn as she scattered breadcrumbs for the ducks circling the water's edge. Allara watched her with something close to disbelief still, even after 3 months of mornings waking in a real bed, 3 months of meals around a dining table, 3 months of Emma following her from room to room humming songs she was learning at her new school. The bruises on Allara's throat had faded to nothing. The hollows under her eyes had filled. She wore a simple cream sundress that fit properly, her dark hair brushed and shining in the afternoon light. Dominic walked beside her, his hand brushing hers as they moved across the park. Neither of them pulled away. His tailored black shirt was open at the collar despite the casual setting, and his gold watch caught the sunlight as he reached down and took her fingers, lacing them through his own. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said quietly, watching Emma chase a particularly bold duck near the water's edge. "The house. The one in the notice." Allara's breath caught slightly. She had not spoken about this to anyone, not since the foreclosure papers had arrived like a death sentence 2 years ago. "It was Vietnamese," she said, her voice trembling like a candle in the wind. "She built it herself after escaping Saigon. Painted every wall, grew jasmine in the garden, kept photographs of people she had lost in frames on every shelf. When she died, I could not pay the back taxes. $85,000. The liens kept stacking. I tried, I worked every double shift the diner offered, but it was never enough." She paused, watching Emma point excitedly at a duckling half hidden in the reeds. "I lost it 3 years ago last month. Someone bought it at auction. I do not even know who. I drive past sometimes and it is empty. Boarded up. Like the whole piece of her just disappeared." Dominic listened without speaking, his thumb moving slowly across the back of her hand. They stood there together in the sun while Emma's laughter drifted across the grass. 2 days later, Allara found a folder on her bed, cream-colored, expensive, sealed with a wax stamp that looked like something from another century. Her hand shook as she opened it. The deed was inside. Her grandmother's house. The address she had driven past 100 times with her hands gripping the steering wheel, unable to look at it directly. But there was more. The liens were cleared. The taxes paid. Every single dollar of the $85,000 marked as settled. The property transferred into her name, free and clear, as of yesterday at 2 in the afternoon. She found Dominic in his office, the room dark except for the desk lamp casting sharp shadows across his face. The news on one of the monitors showed footage of construction cranes, development sites, legitimate business. His empire shifting. "I cannot accept this," she whispered, the folder trembling in her hands. "It is too much. I cannot." "It was never about the money," Dominic said, standing, moving toward her with that measured, deliberate grace. "It was about returning something that was stolen from you. A piece of your grandmother. A piece of home." Allara opened her mouth and no words came. She closed the folder carefully and set it down on his desk. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, and he pulled her against his chest like she was something precious, something breakable, something worth protecting. She felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear and thought about all the nights she had slept in her car, listening to the rain, believing she was disposable. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." He pressed his face against her hair and held her while the monitors glowed silently around them. A week later, Allara stood in front of a mirror in a bedroom that had been prepared for her, wearing a simple blue dress that Dominic had brought her, nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth, but perfectly cut in a way that made her feel like someone worth looking at. Emma sat on the bed braiding her own dark hair, humming tunelessly. "You look beautiful," Emma said, which was the kind of unguarded honesty only children could manage. "Thank you, little one. Are you ready? I do not want to go without you." Those 6 words. Allara sat down beside her and took her small hand. "I am not going anywhere. I will be right beside you all night." The Corsetti mansion opened into a formal dining room where 12 other crime family members sat with their wives. The room smelled like expensive perfume and money old enough to require no introduction. Candles burned in crystal holders. The silverware was real silver, each piece worth more than Allara had earned in a week at the diner. The wives looked her over with the precision of predators evaluating prey. She could read their calculations. The dress was not designer, the shoes were practical, there were calluses on her hands from work. "And who are you, dear?" a woman in pearls asked, her smile sharp as broken glass. Allara set down her water glass carefully. The room seemed very quiet suddenly, only the soft sound of breathing and the distant murmur of the kitchen staff. "I was homeless," Allara said, her voice steady now, nothing trembling. "I met Emma at a women's shelter where I volunteered. Dominic gave me a chance when I had nothing else left." The silence that followed was the kind that swallows sound. Then Dominic's hand covered hers on the table, and he leaned forward slightly. "Allara saved my daughter's life and earned her place in my family through courage, not inheritance," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath carved in stone. "Anyone who questions that can leave." No one left. The wives' expression shifted from dismissal to something wary, something that might have been respect. When the wives spoke to her again, their voices were different. 3 nights later, the library was dark except for lamplight pooling on the leather chair where Dominic sat, financial reports spread across his lap like a map of an empire. His face was tired in a way that went beyond the surface, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too many choices, each one casting a shadow that never quite lifted. Allara brought him coffee, dark roast, no sugar, the way she had learned he preferred it, and she sat across from him in the leather chair by the window. "You still have nightmares," she said. It was not a question. She had heard him calling out Marcus's name at 3 in the morning, had watched him wake with his hand reaching for something he could no longer touch. Dominic closed the reports and looked at her directly. "Every night," he admitted. "The choice I made. My own blood." Allara wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup and nodded. "I have nightmares about Robert's hands on my throat. About the sound of a gun firing in a garden. About living in a car and wondering if this night would be the one I did not survive." They sat in the lamplight, 2 people broken by different hands, shaped by different terrors. "You make me believe," Dominic said slowly, "that something good can still grow in this world I have built." Allara looked at him and felt something shift in her chest, something that felt like recognition, like coming home. "You make me believe I am worth more than what was done to me," she whispered. He leaned forward. They were inches apart now, and the air between them felt charged with the weight of months of proximity, of watching each other from across rooms, of hands brushing and neither pulling away. Then the phone rang. Dominic's jaw tightened. He answered and listened, and Allara watched his face shift to stone. When he hung up, his eyes had gone dark. "Emma has been asking about Marcus," he said. "She remembers him. She wants to know what happened." The question hung between them, the question every child asks eventually, the one that requires truth even when the truth is devastating. "She needs therapy," Allara said carefully. "Professional help processing what happened. She needs to understand that sometimes people we love make terrible choices, that it is not her fault, that she is safe now." Over the following weeks, Emma worked with a therapist named Dr. Sarah Reeves, and slowly, patiently, she began to understand. Not forgive, not yet. But understand. That betrayal was not her responsibility to fix. That safety was not something she had to earn. The healing was not instant, but it was real. 6 months after the diner, Emma's 7th birthday arrived with white balloons drifting across the garden and a chocolate cake with strawberries that made her eyes shine. Children from her school ran through the lawn, their laughter genuine and loud. Allara stood beside Dominic watching Emma blow out her candles, and she realized she was not surviving anymore. She was living. Emma's wish, she would learn later, was whispered to Dominic at dawn that morning: "I wish for Lara to stay forever." That evening, after the guests left, after Emma was asleep upstairs in her room that no longer had nightmares painted on its walls, Allara and Dominic stood in the garden under string lights, the scent of jasmine floating on the warm air. "I have spent 6 months finding the right words," Dominic said, his hand finding hers in the darkness, and failing every time. "You walked into my life broken and bleeding, and you made everything make sense. I did not know I needed saving until you saved my daughter. Until you saved me." Allara stepped closer. The night air was warm against her skin, and she could feel his heartbeat like a drum keeping time. "I spent 8 months believing I was worthless," she said. "Poison. Nothing to offer. You showed me I was wrong. That strength is not about what you own. It is about what you do when you have nothing left." He kissed her gently, certainly, like a promise being made and kept all at once. It tasted like jasmine and like home. 1 year later, Allara stood in the Sacred Heart Children's Shelter, the place where she had once slept on a break room cot and dreamed of something better. She brought supplies now, and funding, and volunteer training programs. She ran a non-profit that had helped 43 women in its first year, the same number as the names on Dominic's old ledgers, a deliberate choice, a deliberate redemption. Emma was thriving in 2nd grade, confident and joyful and whole. Dominic had shifted toward legitimate enterprises, still powerful but building instead of destroying. Allara climbed into the car where they waited, Dominic behind the wheel, Emma waving from the back seat with her new sketchbook. They drove through New Orleans streets that once felt like a prison and now felt like possibility, and Allara knew the answer to a question she had asked on a night 8 months ago, bleeding and broken in a diner. She was not nobody. She never had been. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like and share this video with the people you love. Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation. We wish all of you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace.